Ahí está. Bueno, bienvenidos entonces a esta segunda parte de nuestro encuentro de hoy. Ahora vamos a escuchar la conferencia de Patrick Bixby. Patrick es profesor asociado de inglés en el New College of Interdisciplinary Arts and Sciences de la Universidad Estatal de Arizona. Tras licenciarse en psicología por la Universidad de California en Los Ángeles, y obtener un máster en inglés por la California State University de Long Beach. Bixby se doctoró en inglés en Emory University en 2003. Sus intereses académicos abarcan una variedad de campos, si bien su investigación se enmarca principalmente en el ámbito de los estudios irlandeses, también aborda temas relacionados con el modernismo británico, la teoría y la crítica postcolonial, la filosofía continental y cuestiones relacionadas con los viajes, la movilidad y el cuerpo, que bueno, ahí está, va a ser la participación en esta conferencia. Imparte cursos en estos campos y en historia de la novela, historia del cine, de la crítica literaria, el pensamiento del siglo XX, el posmodernismo y sobre métodos de investigación interdisciplinar. Actualmente es vicepresidente de la Sociedad Samuel Beckett. Así que bueno, muchas gracias, Patrick. Vamos a escuchar ahora su conferencia, Good Passports, Bad Passports.
Gracias,
y luego
Mercedes.
abriremos un espacio de diálogo.
Hola a todos, estimados colegas. Buenas tardes en tus países. Es un placer encontrarme aquí con ustedes. Mis disculpas por llegar muy tarde a la primera sesión, pero me gustaría agradecerles a Mercedes y Cristian por invitarme y por organizar este fascinante workshop. Pero perdóname, voy a hablar en inglés, ¿no? So in English, thanks everyone. I'm actually going to begin, if I can share my screen, let me try to do that. I'm going to begin with a brief video clip, which is from a dance performance produced by Helena Waldman, a German choreographer. And this is the item from which my title comes. Good Passports, Bad Passports is the title of this production, which is from 2017. So I'm just going to show a few minutes of this so that you can get a sense of her concerns, and that will bring me to the concerns of my talk. So here we go. Can people hear the video? No? Let me see if I can change that. So are you able to hear any of the video at this point? Yes. Well, okay, it's paused now, but now? No?
No, we can't hear.
Okay. Well, good thing it's a dance performance. The sound is not that important, but I can see, let's see. Well, I'll just play the video. That will be fine for now. Okay. So as I describe in the translation that you received, the performance is based on the various refugee crises which were current in 2016, 2017, when Waldman was constructing the piece. And at the outset of the piece, there's a voiceover which serves to ask a number of questions reminiscent of the passport ritual that we encounter at the airport, at border crossings around the world. And that serves to divide up the group of dancers on the stage into two opposing groups, which come to represent, as it were, two opposing national communities. And they engage in all variety of animosity and conflict during the course of the production, which plays out scenes that are also reminiscent of the refugee crises that were taking place at the time, continue to take place until at the end of the piece, and you get a glimpse of it there in the production or in the trailer here. A group of volunteers come out into the middle of the stage and form a kind of wall between the two groups of performers, which keeps them apart so that their conflicts are neutralized. But then the performers begin to push on that wall, which begins to spin around in the middle of the stage until the whole thing collapses. And all of the performers, including the volunteers who had formed the wall, come to the front of the stage and give us an image of something like a borderless world for the first time, a world beyond the nation state regime where we are not separated by these artificial boundaries that have been put into place during the history of the nation state. So that piece raises a number of the questions, a number of the issues that I want to discuss with you today. Waldman describes her inspiration for good passports, bad passports, as the simple recognition that good passports provide their holders with a freedom of movement that is denied to those who possess bad passports. So this basic binary structures her performance piece, and it will structure the comments I have for you today. So Waldman has traveled with dancers and show crews through various parts of the world, and she's frequently witnessed the delays that those with bad passports suffer. They're subjected to intense questioning while Waldman, with her German passport, was able to move through customs and immigration processes with ease and expediency. So this is something that she encountered during her professional life and has translated into this piece. Of course, she's not alone in such observations. This is a common enough observation about the passport regime. Salman Rushdie, whose face you will have glimpsed a moment ago, writes in his collection of essays, Step Across This Line, about a day spent at the Customs and Immigration area in Heathrow Airport in London, watching how passengers are treated as they pass through or attempt to pass through the passport controls there. The one factor that he sees as making all the difference is the possession of a US passport, which of course is one of the so-called good passports in the global regime, which enables travelers to move quickly on their way, regardless of their ethnic features or presumed associations. So a good passport provides this freedom of movement that is denied to those who possess other sorts of passports. He concludes that for those to whom the world is closed, such openness is greatly to be desired. Those who assume that openness to be theirs by right perhaps value it less. And I would say my fellow citizens in the US who possess a good passport don't really appreciate what passport holders from other nations encounter when they find themselves at a border crossing. So this performance piece that I've just shown you, good passports, bad passports, provides a highly charged recognition of this duality in the geopolitical landscape. In doing so, the dance production alludes to passport indexes, such as the one that's compiled by Henley and Partners. Sorry. Oh, there it is. Which is a self-described firm for global citizens. So I don't expect you to be able to read the details here, but every quarter, so 4 times a year, Henley Partners updates this list, which ranks passports according to the number of destinations their holders can access without a prior visa. So the strongest passports in the last quarter of 2021, in this case from Japan and Singapore, could access 192 different nations without a prior visa. And the weaker passports can access only 25 or 26 nations without a prior passport. In 2017, the year of the dance piece production, the Henley Passport Index ranked Germany at the very top of the list, closely followed by Sweden, Denmark, Finland, Italy, Spain, and the United States. With the capability of traveling to 176 nations visa-free, while at that time Afghanistan could be found at the bottom just behind nations like Somalia, Syria, Pakistan, and Iraq, with just 24 nations opening their borders to its passport holders without a prior visa. So the Afghan or the Somali, the citizen of those nations, may assert both their personal, and their passport may assert both their personal and national identities, but it collapses them in a way that effectively imprisons the individual in his or her nation of origin because of the denial of their freedom of movement. In effect, the list codifies the very sentiments that Rushdie expresses about his own passports, and that's this slide that I have out of order somehow. That while his British passport, which he gained as an adult, had done its stuff efficiently and unobtrusively, the Indian passport that this Anglo-Indian writer had possessed as a boy in the 1950s was what he calls a paltry thing. Instead of offering the bearer a general open sesame to anywhere in the world, it stated in grouchy bureaucratic language that it was only valid for travel to a specified and distressingly short list of countries. So the bad passport decrees that its holder will be waylaid, interrogated, turned back, or even detained at airport checkpoints and border controls around the globe. So if a good passport under the current passport regime is the key to unlocking the doors of international travel, providing freedom of movement and unfettered opportunity, then a bad passport, again, locks away its holder as the inmate of a so-called undesirable national community, unwelcome in much of the wider world. So good passports, bad passports, Waldman's dance piece, ends without offering us a clear path beyond this titular binary, good and bad. Though the statements of this spectral voiceover that I mentioned earlier do provide the dancers with an opportunity to choose a different image of the future. And I've alluded to this as well. So at the end, the voiceover narration announces, I believe that one day national borders won't exist. Ich glaube, dass es irgendwann keine Landsgrenzen mehr geben wird. So everything is in English and German to indicate this kind of tension between national identities. At the same time, the production has been a visceral and sometimes exhilarating reminder to its audiences in places like Stuttgart, Bolzano, Beirut, Tel Aviv, so it's traveled widely around the world, that for now, good passports provide bodies with security, mobility, opportunity, which is denied to the bodies of persons just as deserving of those with superior travel documents. So it divides the global community, this passport ranking, into the haves and the have-nots, as it were. It serves notice, Waldman's piece does, of the differential value of passports, often ignored by those who enjoy documents with significant economic and political value, such as a US passport. Even as it is sensed acutely by those who face overwhelming obstacles to travel and migration based on nothing more than their citizenship or country of origin. But as the wall of multi-ethnic, multi-generational bodies that I alluded to before whirls around the stage, reaching a point where the center cannot hold and scattering the performers to the four corners of the space, we glimpse this world without borders, this sort of utopian idea of a world where passports are no longer requisite at all, where our current international system of separation and obstruction and detention collapses entirely. We see a sign, if only momentarily at the end of the production, of what Rushdie calls the post-frontier, the after frontier, the after borders, which might just help us to imagine a new age of unrestricted movement. Yet the vision of a world without borders may be far too utopian to expect in our geopolitical reality anytime soon. For the time being, the passport remains, and in fact becomes continuously more an object of immense political, personal, and financial significance, which has created a global hierarchy of, as I mentioned before, the haves and have-nots. Those with good passports and those with bad passports are separate and distinct, but all subject to that little book, the passport, they present at border crossings and airport checkpoints. More than ever, the rights we enjoy depend not just on the fact of our citizenship or our possession of a passport, but the color of the passport, the seal on the cover, the status of the issuing country in the international community. Our passport defines who we are in the geopolitical order, where we can travel, reside, work, and on, all the other privileges associated with freedom of movement. At present, there is little international effort dedicated to increasing hospitality across sovereign nation states, or seeking practical means to collapse the inequities of the international passport regime. There's Rushdie's early passport. This is Article 13 of the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. Article 2 is often cited by those who advocate for freedom of movement. It proclaims that everyone has the right to leave any country, including one's own, and to return to one's country. But the fact of the matter is that not all passports are created equal or treated with equal respect. The irony of this is that it would take nation states of their own accord to enforce this kind or allow this kind of freedom of movement. The United Nations has no authority to make this article a reality. So it stands as a kind of symbolic gesture, but not much more. So it should not come as a surprise that in such circumstances, a market for second passports has emerged and has grown exponentially during the course of the 21st century, the last 20 years or so, as passport holders seek to enhance their status in the international system. Henley and Partners, they're the ones who put together the passport ranking, but they're joined by other firms such as Sovereign Man. This is the homepage of the Sovereign Man website, one of the entities that will help you to get a second passport if that is your desire. Other firms like this are called things like Nomad Capitalist or Best Citizenships. So these have emerged in numbers to advise their clients, who are usually individuals of high net worth, business people, investors, and so forth, who are looking for new prospects, tax breaks, and so forth, and various means to attain new citizenship through a second passport. These methods include, of course, citizenship by ancestry. For instance, if you have a grandparent who's born in Ireland, you can apply for Irish citizenship and attain it quite readily, actually. So many take that route. But you can also gain it by investment. And this is the case sometimes without even having to step into the country where you're gaining your new passport. So the price of a property purchase, somewhere around $250,000 US, or for a government fee, which start as low as $25,000 US, depending on just how good or how highly ranked the passport is. Individuals can acquire documents from nations such as St. Kitts and Nevis. This is a very popular second passport for global business types, but other countries as well: Dominica, Cyprus, Vanuatu, Comoros. So there are significant financial barriers to attaining global citizenship in this sense. But there's also clout associated with the phrase, I possess two different passports, perhaps one bad one and one good one. Ik besitze zwei verschiedene Pässe. The precious books promise investors more political stability, or enhanced opportunity, though, as might be expected, these programs have often met with charges of corruption, embezzlement, and other problems. Okay, so this takes me to the next section of my presentation, which deals with Sarah Ahmed's work. At border crossings and airport checkpoints, even a good passport is dependent on a relationship to a body and a name, which are subject to the same kinds of judgment and categorization directed at the document itself, at the passport. Sarah Ahmed, whose scholarship is positioned at the intersection of feminist, queer, and race studies, has written incisively about what she calls the politics of mobility. Here's Ahmed. That is, the politics of who has the ability to move without difficulty across frontiers, of who gets to be at home and who gets to extend their bodies into an inhabitable space. She starts with the observation that some bodies are stopped, this is a phrase she often uses, stopped more than others because they're subjected to interrogation by agents of the state, including policemen, border guards, customs officials, who ask a familiar set of questions. Who are you? Why are you here? What are you doing? These questions are associated with conditional hospitality and state sovereignty, and are directed more insistently at bodies determined to be, in some sense, suspicious or out of place by virtue of their skin color, and also the surname attached to their bodies, suggesting a wrong or bad, as it were, ethnic lineage, a wrong or bad national affiliation. So these interrogations at the frontier are directed at bodies that cannot be integrated within the ideological coordinates of the nation state as belonging to citizens. They don't fit the assumptions about citizenship in a given nation. Instead, they subject bodies to stasis. They stop them. These interrogations deny them freedom of movement and simultaneously indicate that they do not belong within the space of the nation state. Moreover, and this is something that Ahmed emphasizes, they leave a mark on the body, transforming it into a locus of intense social stress and official scrutiny in the process of being stopped. So there's an affective or emotional component to this, which is exercised on the individual who doesn't have a body that matches the passport as officials think it should. Ahmed exemplifies this phenomenon with a story from her own experience. And this occurred at a US Customs and Immigration checkpoint not long after the September 11th terrorist attacks. So this is her description of that event. I arrive in New York, clutching my British passport. I hand it over. The airport official looks at me and then looks at my passport. I know what questions will follow. Where are you from? My passport indicates my place of birth. Britain, I say. I feel like adding, can't you read? I was born in Salford, but I stopped myself. He looks down at my passport, not at me. Where's your father from? It was the same last time I arrived in New York. It's the question I get asked now, which seems to locate what is suspect in my body, not in my body, but as that which is passed down the family line, almost like a bad inheritance. Pakistan, I say slowly. He asks, do you have a Pakistani passport? No, I say. Eventually he lets me through. The name Ahmed, a Muslim name, slows me down. It blocks my passage, even if only temporarily. I get stuck and then move on. This is not, as Ahmed emphasizes, an isolated incident in her experience. Her name and her skin, those twin legacies from her father, repeatedly elicit this kind of interrogation, even though she has what is ostensibly a good passport, a British passport. Because they connect Ahmed with her Pakistani heritage and its association with a bad passport, as it were, a bad national entity in the geopolitical system. These personal birthrights have become, in a word, politicized. When she flies out of New York a week later, she learns that her name has been added to the so-called no-fly list. Those individuals are not permitted to board a plane in the US. And she must again stop until the situation can be rectified by a TSA supervisor, one of the travel officials. To inherit a Muslim name in the West, she writes, is to inherit the impossibility of a body that can trail behind, or even to inherit the impossibility of extending the body's reach. In other words, it's to be stopped or to experience stasis, as she's described it. To be recognized as a Muslim, or at least potentially Muslim, by virtue of her name and her body, is to be subjected to a certain discomfort in these spaces, where she must be constantly on guard against new infringements on her so-called rites of passage, her ability to move freely through the international state system. So like Waldman, Ahmed recognizes this simple reality, that passports allow some bodies to flow easily across borders, but that they do not work this way for everyone. For Ahmed, this is not just a matter of good passports and bad passports. Having the right passport makes no difference if you have the wrong body or the wrong name. And indeed, the stranger with the right passport might cause particular trouble as the one who risks passing through or passing by, she remarks. So to be sure, contrary to what Salman Rushdie observes, Ahmed suggests that a perceived schism, a split between a good passport and a suspicious body, can produce new forms of strain and stress. And this is one of the things that my research is particularly interested in, is the sort of affective or emotional component of the passport system, how it impacts individuals at that level, at the kind of visceral or affective level. If the nationality of the passport does not seem to follow the line of the name, and such judgments exercise histories of normative thinking, then the body is suspect. This is Ahmed again. Suspicious bodies generate questions. Where are you from? Where are your parents from? And so on and so on. Oops. Sorry, just clicked the wrong page there. Her experience of being stopped in this manner then is not only a question of being waylaid or inconvenienced. Instead, being stopped, this is the phrase that she uses over and over, stopped with emphasis, reorientates the attention of the passport holder back to herself, as her body does not just come along with her, but draws the wrong kind of attention from officials of the state. Some bodies, she says, are recognized as belonging to strangers, to aliens, of course, to potential terrorists. This is the subtext. While some bodies are recognized as being at home, belonging in the space of the nation state. And their passports enhance or extend their mobility because of that. So nation states show no sign of letting go of the passport as a means of identification and movement control to support their claims to sovereignty. Instead, with the implementation of new technology and design features, the passport has only become more prominent in its role of defining what bodies are at home and what bodies are out of place in the age of Brexit, Trumpism, and other populisms. I think you've heard a little bit about this previously today. When a new British passport design was presented at the Globe Theatre in 2015, this is the presentation ceremony for that passport, it contained images of cultural icons such as William Shakespeare, John Constable, Ada Lovelace, of technical advancements such as the London Underground and the Black Penny Stamp, and cultural landmarks, including the Houses of Parliament, the London Eye, Edinburgh Castle, and so forth. So it is very much a nationalistic document, if you like, containing the emblems of the nation state across the stamping pages. But perhaps incongruously, in an apparent concession to the idea of a multicultural Britain, the document also displays images of several major works by the renowned Bombay British sculptor Anish Kapoor. These are drawings related to his work. So this is a strange kind of anomaly in this very nationalistic document to have a few references to Indian-born British citizens and their cultural production. But while we might note that Shakespeare's face can be found throughout the passport, You can see his face there on either side, both stamping pages. Shakespeare is on every page of this generation of the British passport. It's only these abstract sculptures of Kapoor, not his bodily presence, not his face, not his skin, that we can see in the pages of the passport. This new passport, designed to celebrate the so-called creative United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland over the last 5 centuries, also boasts the latest technologies for preventing forgery, making it one of the most secure documents in the world, according to the UK Minister for Immigration, James Brokenshire. So there were 2 efforts involved in the production of this new British passport in 2015. One, the celebration of these points of national pride. The other, the enhancement of the security of the document to prevent forgery and so forth. It's not until the design of the British passport became a talking point in the political hurly-burly of the Brexit. Sorry, it was not long until the design of the British passport became a talking point in the political hurly-burly, the controversies around the Brexit referendum. In August 2016, so not long after the introduction of this new passport design, Brexit Party leader Nigel Farage took to social media to demand, "We want our passports back." Farage has been a very controversial figure in the US as well, because he became a close ally of our Donald Trump. For Farage, this demand meant removing the words European Union from the cover of the British travel document as a symbol of taking back his country, his nationality, his vision of Britain, while closing the door to what he deemed to be undesirable immigration from other parts of the EU. So the passport became an emblem for the Brexit effort in that regard as well. Here then was a crucial emblem of national sovereignty for the Brexit leader. In August 2019, Farage used social media again to post a picture of himself smiling smugly and holding up his new, what he called EU-free passport, which reads simply United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland on the cover. So he captioned the photos, you can see there, "We got our passports back." In March 2020, continuing to shed all signs of the EU from its passport, the United Kingdom began phasing out the burgundy covers that had been used for the European version since 1988. You can see those on the left there, and phasing in navy blue covers in a return to the original color from the British passport dating back to 1921. So this is part of this sort of Make Britain Great Again effort, returning everything to this moment of past glory, including the passport itself. Though rather ironically, we might note, the new passports were manufactured by a Dutch company, Gemalto, at a printing plant in Poland. So despite their gestures towards national pride, they're really not British documents, at least in terms of their manufacturer. Then, as if to double down on the symbolic imports of the document, the new British passport also carries national emblems, not just on the front of the cover, but also on the back, where it's embossed with the national flowers in a shamrock of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. So in the moment of Brexit, the passport became this overriding symbol of Britishness, and also a kind of warning to anyone who wanted to immigrate to England now that they were removed from the EU. And not surprisingly, in this new iteration of the document, those images of Anish Kapoor's sculpture, those gestures towards a multicultural Britain, have also been removed. So these design changes may have pleased those like Farage, who shout, "Make Britain great again," or "We want our country back," though the blue EU free passport holders would likely be chagrined to learn that their travel documents are not as good as many of their EU neighbors. The 2020 Global Passport Power Ranking, the next one that came out after these transformations, based on a total mobility score of visa-free or visa-on-arrival destinations, places passports from Germany, Sweden, Finland, Luxembourg, Spain, Denmark, Portugal, it's a long list, all now ahead of the UK passport. So Even as these gestures towards national pride emerge on the document becomes less good, as it were. This situation is not likely to improve as more and more countries require visas for UK passport holders to travel across their borders, and as opportunities for the British to study, work, and retire in the Schengen area in continental Europe continue to diminish. This is not to say that given the relative economic might of the United Kingdom, its passports will suddenly become bad. Rather, it's a reminder that the hubris of nationalism is often in the service of a deeper insecurity, and that sometimes it acts as a direct threat to the mobility and security of its own citizens in the global system. It's also a reminder that the history of the passport is still unfolding, though not necessarily in a linear or teleological way that would result in a definitive list of winners and losers. This is perhaps no more evident than the story of the Muslim travel ban and the US passport. This is a familiar story for us here in the US. In January 2017, Donald Trump signed Executive Order 13769, which was titled Protecting the Nation from Foreign Terrorist Entry into the United States. In doing so, he asserted that citizens from 6 predominantly Muslim nations, Libya, Syria, Iran, Somalia, Yemen, and Sudan, who did not have a bona fide connection or close familial relationship with individuals in the United States would not be allowed to cross into the national territory. So here was a rather overt, blunt assertion of sovereign power by the nation state, with a flourish of his pen, the Sharpie that he signed everything with. Trump summarily rendered certain passports bad. Just how arbitrarily this assertion of sovereign power was can be gleaned from the fact that no one from any of the countries named in the executive order, those 6 countries I listed, had been linked to a terrorist act in the United States since 2001. So there's really no national security reason to do this. At the same time, countries that had been the source of terrorists were not listed in the executive order. Capricious enforcement of the ban led to the separation of families, the abandonment of longtime US residents in foreign countries, and the stranding of travelers in airport terminals around the world. So there was chaos in the aftermath of this executive order. Suddenly, the national seal on their passports could leave them cast out, removed, stopped, to use Ahmed's language. The rights of these citizens from elsewhere were abruptly suspended as if their lives were devoid of legal, political, or even human value. So those who devise such bans, like Trump and his cronies, would do well to remember that the narrative is always subject to change, that in the history of our geopolitical arrangements, what goes around is always bound to come around. On the last day of January 2020, the United States declared a state of public emergency in response to the spread of the COVID-19 virus and simultaneously banned foreign nationals, other than the immediate family of US citizens, from entering the country within 14 days of being in China. This was the first effort to stop immigration by the Trump administration. Although most studies agree that travel restrictions might slow but could not contain the spread of the virus, additional travel bans were soon implemented. There's a whole series of them then. On March 2nd, the government extended the ban to those who had been in Iran. Then on March 13th, to those who had been in any country within the Schengen area in Europe in the previous 2 weeks. But the clumsy rollout of this European ban, which did not clarify the exemption of US citizens or those traveling from the UK and Ireland, resulted in chaotic scenes with thousands of travelers crammed together in airport terminals across the United States and Europe. This was all over the evening news in the US for several days after it. These scenes of people crammed together, sharing the virus, most likely, in these environments because of this capricious effort by the Trump administration. The Henley Passport Index, which I've referred to, captured, Soon, however, the ineffective response of the Trump administration to the spread of the virus led the European Union to drop the United States from its list of countries whose tourists were welcome. So there was a bit of revenge, perhaps, here. The Henley Passport Index captured this dramatic drop in prestige in an updated ranking, which indicated that US passport holders now had visa-free access to just 158 countries, down 27 from January 2020. So within 2 months, the US passport dropped precipitously down the rankings. In fact, it had dropped to 25th, where it had been number 1 just a few years earlier in 2012. Media outlets around the globe were quick to report that the US passport was now virtually, if only temporarily, equivalent to the Mexican passport in terms of the freedom of movement afforded to its holders. The media enjoyed this irony and reported on it widely. We see an emergence of a new global hierarchy in terms of mobility. Christian Killian, chairman of Henley & Partners, said, with countries that had effectively managed the pandemic taking the lead and countries that have handled it poorly falling behind, the US being an example of that. So the pandemic vividly demonstrated to US passport holders that their government, perhaps far too late, that the right to leave one's country, to travel freely, and to return unobstructed does not accrue to us as human beings, as would be the case if we follow the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, but rather as citizens of particular nation states. And those rights may be revoked at a moment's notice. So this whole fiasco gave lie to that UN declaration, unfortunately. Responding to both the discriminatory practices of border crossing and the human consequences of being stopped, Maltese poet Antoine Cassar has created a combined protest poem and art book called Passport. That's a photograph of it actually taken in the airport in Buenos Aires. I happened to have it with me when I was there last month. So this next section that I'll be covering is mostly related to this little book and sort of implications that this work of art has for how we might think about the passport going forward into the future. Printed in a small format and bound in a red cardboard cover that mimics the Maltese passport, you can see it there. The book was originally published in the Maltese language, but subsequently has been reprinted in a series of multilingual editions. So you can read the poem in English, Spanish, Slovenian, Croatian, and 12 other languages, in fact. And it's printed in one of 3 colors, which Cassar describes as ocean blue, dried blood red, or coal black. These editions are embossed with the image of a migratory swan circling the globe. Rather than enclosing a photograph, though, or the personal data and legalese that we would associate with the passport, this book of poetry contains approximately 250 lines of verse that proclaim dissent from the wounding force of the international passport system, and its often brutal forms of exclusion and expulsion. Addressed directly to the holder of the little book, the poem begins by acknowledging the corporeal presence of both the passport and the passport holder. So this is addressing many of the same concerns that Sarah Ahmed had addressed in her work. Yours, old or new friend, of the heart and of the skin, who grasped me with both hands, strong and caressing, and welcomed me with a warm and open face. So this is a document that promises the possibility of mobility for all bodies, regardless of national origin or skin color, in a kind of utopian reverie. I think it's important to emphasize this is a rather utopian or wishful document, which imagines a world without the stress of border crossing or the fear of being stopped. Instead of prompting interrogations, Passport offers reassurances. I'll pick up reading here. You can enter and leave without fear. There's no one to stop you, no one to jump in the queue or send you to the back. There's no need to wait, no one to say, "Ira pepier bitte," quickening your heartbeat with the pallor of his finger. No one to squint or to glare at you according to the gross domestic product per capita of the nation you left behind. No one to brand you as stranger, alien, criminal, illegal immigrant, extracommunautaire. Nobody is extra. So here's a document that cannot be denied, cannot be turned back on its holder, cannot be used to label her suspicious or out of place. Just a few more lines from the poem. Yours, this passport, for all peoples, for all landscapes. Take it where you will. There is no need for a stamp or visa. You can leave or stay as you please. It does not expire. You can renounce it. It is not the property of the government, duke or queen. You may even have several. Passaport, then, this book of poetry, is more properly understood as a kind of anti-passport, a document that imagines a world where passports will no longer be labeled good or bad, ushering some bodies along while waylaying others. It is, as I've suggested, a radically utopian object that, in the guise of a travel document, dispatches with all assumptions about nations, about borders, about aliens, immigrants, and others that have been attached to our passports. It's a document that, as Cassar puts it, imagines a world without customs and checkpoints, without border police out to snatch away the dawn, without the need for forms, documents, or biometric data. A world without the need to cross the desert barefoot, nor to float off on a raft or an itinerary of hope, all too quickly struck out by the realities of blackmail and exploitation. So this book is, in other words, a precious object of sorts that helps us to envision what Rushdie had called the post-frontier. The poet Cassar, who had grown up between England, Malta, and Spain, and subsequently studied and worked in several other European countries, has traveled the world performing the poem to spread his vision. This is in Taiwan, where he's reading. At festivals and conferences on 4 continents, he's invited his audience to bring their real passports to his performances and then symbolically to renounce them and their national identities during their reading. So he performs a kind of alternative passport ritual. Cassar is also committed to donating the proceeds from sales of the little book to grassroots organizations that support universal freedom of movement and assist refugees in 14 different countries. So this is just a list that you might scan of the different organizations that he has sponsored with the sales of his book. So what does passports suggest about the possible futures of our actual travel documents? How can such a utopian document help us to reconceive the function of our passports? What does the limitless hospitality postulated by Cassar suggest about the interests and potentials of a geopolitics to come? So as a cultural historian, I refer to poets for this kind of thinking rather than to political scientists or philosophers. But I think Cassar has a lot to tell us on the matter. As we've seen, passports, in one form or another, have been with us for more than 3 millennia. This is the ground that I cover in my book. But in their most recent manifestation, which is just about 100 years old, the modern passport emerges from the First World War and is formalized and universalized during the 1920s. So it's celebrating a centenary of sorts. So this most recent manifestation, the one that served to reinforce borders, bans, and the sovereignty of the nation state, is an eminently modern occurrence. The passport, for all its promise of mobility, escape, and freedom, also serves as a reminder that human beings, in all of our vulnerability, are subject to the current status of our paperwork far more than the basic fact of our humanity, again giving lie to that UN declaration. And unfortunately, recent developments betray no sign that this historical trend will soon abate. In addition to its blue cover and national emblems, the new British passport has introduced a series of technical advancements to ensure the security of the document, most notably a laser-engraved polycarbonate biodata page with an embedded radio frequency identification chip, which duplicates the biodata to prevent forgery. So passports become more and more high-tech with every passing year. And in the process, they become ever more invasive, definitive, and all but indestructible documents of our identity. Meanwhile, the passport inspection ritual, which we face at checkpoints and airport border controls and so forth, has also been enhanced with the use of fingerprint, iris, and even facial scanning. Nation states from Canada to Japan, the Netherlands to Australia have begun to collect more data from not just their own citizens, but also international travelers passing through their airports. So if you choose to travel to many of these destinations, your biodata will be collected and held in a database belonging to that nation state. Of course, the reasons for the nation state to use identification documents for security are numerous. But these enhanced procedures also raise myriad concerns about how much data we're comfortable with governments collecting and how much we want to open ourselves to surveillance. Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the discussion of health passports with proof of vaccination or negative test results only exacerbated these concerns. So this debate, which had been ongoing for decades, really reached a kind of crescendo during the pandemic. Collectively, these new documents ensure that now, more than ever, we are our documents. They tell the world who we are, where we come from, and where we can go. Although it's our bodies that must match the document and not the other way around. The document is a more authentic indication of identity than our embodied selves when it comes to this procedure. So looking ahead, some commentators have perceived the recent digital transformations of our travel credentials as a sign that the end of the passport as we know it, the little paper books that we have, is on the horizon. They foresee a day when the smartphone will replace the passport book, just as it has progressively replaced other forms of print media, from our boarding passes that allow us to pass through the passenger gates to the books and magazines we read in flight, and so on and so forth. Those who promote these advancements promise that digitization will improve the security and reliability of identification documents, increase the efficiency of border control processes, and thus upgrade the passenger experience. This is a phrase that comes up a lot in this discourse, the passenger experience. But most versions of this brave new world also require increased storage and sharing of passenger-related information. For instance, passengers departing Dubai International Airport can use an app called Smart UAE Wallet on their mobile phones and a scan of their fingerprints to pass through what are called smart gates. In this initial phase, the smart wallet contains the passenger ID, passport details, smart gate card data, and there are further plans to link this with all the data of Emiratis and residents. So this will be part of this massive national database in the UAE. Similar programs have emerged in recent years through single state and international initiatives around the world. So this is an ongoing process. Meanwhile, the World Economic Forum and Accenture PLC have collaborated to develop what they call an enhanced security in world travel with the use of biometric authentication, blockchain technology, and identification databases. This ambitious initiative, so that this is a demonstration of how the smartphone serves the role in this known travel digital identity process. And here's how those two entities describe it. The first end-to-end intervention to streamline the entire travel experience by enhancing the ability of authorities to get the information they need when they need it so that they can move people swiftly across borders. So there's something utopian about that claim too, or perhaps not so utopian. In an attempt to allay worries about mass data storage or centralized data registers, the KTDI program, a known traveler digital identity program, has emphasized its use of blockchain-based data sharing systems that would dispense with the need of massive archives. One possible model for this system would operate on the so-called self-sovereign identity concept, of the jargon associated with these corporations, which would allow travelers to store their personal data on their mobile phones, while the system would hold only the certificates and proof of validity for this data. There's perhaps some reason for optimism here, as I alluded to a moment ago, but for all this innovation, the KTDI program still retains the basic model of the passport as a document that limits freedom of movement by authenticating personal identity and national affiliation. Okay, so I'm moving toward a conclusion here, just about at the end. So let us be clear. An improved passenger experience is not the same thing as unlimited hospitality, unlimited freedom of movement, open borders. Passport, that book of poetry, as an anti-passport, calls on us to have the courage to question the articles of faith on which the modern passport is founded, including the holy trinity of nation, state, and territory. The anti-passport provokes us to be always alert for ways to be more open and accommodating to the other. It envisions what Jacques Derrida calls pure hospitality, which consists in welcoming the new arrival before imposing conditions on them, before knowing and asking for anything at all, be it a name or an identity paper. So Derrida's thought on this matter hinges on this binary relationship between what he calls conditional hospitality and pure hospitality. So pure hospitality, this kind of hospitality, demands doing everything possible to address the other, to grant them a proper name, while eschewing the conditions of official interrogation, information registration, and direct border control. All these things that are promised by initiatives like the KTDI. But the philosopher acknowledges that if pure hospitality is to be more than a utopian ideal, our desire for it must always exist in relation to the laws of hospitality, conditional hospitality of the sort that is exercised by the sovereign nation state. So the passport as we know it, as it currently functions, does so only on the basis that the nation state must betray the principle of pure hospitality in order to protect the homeland against unrestricted access of the other. All of this fear about terrorists and Muslims and so forth are a heightened version of that we've seen in my national history in recent years. But this is also to protect guests of the nation state, immigrants, from the dangers that pursue them to the border. At least this is the claim. So there's no easy way to resolve the tension between these two forms of hospitality. In this sense, the passport, whether in paper or in the future digital form, will remain a crucial nexus for our geopolitics, where we negotiate, and I would encourage perhaps even reimagine the balance between conditional and unconditional hospitality, conditional and pure hospitality, the rights of the citizen and the rights of man, as they're rendered up in that UN declaration, for instance, and the continued strength or perhaps final decline of state sovereignty, as well as our place as individuals within those relations. I'll stop there.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias, Patrick. Y ahora vamos a abrir entonces a una ronda de preguntas. Miguel Galindo.
No, aún no tengo ninguna pregunta. Estaba aplaudiendo.
Estabas aplaudiendo.
Gracias, gracias.
¿Y Andrés Pereira estaba aplaudiendo también?
Aplaudiendo y levantando la mano.
Ah, bueno, ahí
Los
está.
dos.
Sí.
Bueno, nada, en primer lugar, agradecerle a Patrick por la exposición. Estuvo muy lindo, está muy bueno el texto. A mí en particular me interesa el tema de pasaportes y migraciones. En realidad vengo trabajando mucho desde los estudios migratorios. Y tenía así como algunas preguntas, comentarios para hacerte. Si mal no escuché, porque no soy muy bueno en inglés, En algún momento dijiste que uno de tus temas de interés tenía que ver con el impacto emocional que tienen los documentos sobre los individuos. Entonces yo te quería consultar cómo trabajas eso, cómo pensás acceder o cómo ves la emocionalidad, bueno, y cómo abordar metodológicamente ese tipo de cosas. Y después me pareció así como muy interesante del trabajo y de la forma de la narrativa del texto, que vos entras por un objeto, ¿no? Que me parece, es mi impresión de la lectura, que vos ingresas por un objeto que es el pasaporte, y de alguna manera terminás interrogando el Estado-Nación, que es como entras por un objeto particular y vas hacia algo mucho más general, sí, o por lo
Tengo aquí.
menos, como yo lo entiendo, es como un modo de interrogar al Estado-Nación y sus bases. Y después te iba a preguntar, ¿qué tipo de recepción tuviste? No sé si has podido poner este trabajo o en otras ocasiones cuando has compartido estas ideas, porque muchas veces pasa que cuando vos planteas, a mí me ha pasado personalmente y nos ha pasado con un grupo con el que trabajamos, cuando vos planteas ideas más del estilo no border, desde las instancias públicas, administrativas, te matan.
Sí,
¿Sí?
sí.
Te decapitan automáticamente porque te califican, bueno, es una utopía, nosotros tenemos que gestionar el día a día. Entonces, bueno, te quería consultar sobre cómo se recibe este tipo de crítica o de
Sí,
preguntas.
sí. So I think I might answer in English if that's okay. I'll be much better in English, but I understood perfectly your question. So I'm still waiting to find out what the reception is in many ways. The book was published at the end of October, and it's been reviewed in some major publications in the Wall Street Journal, in the New York Times, and so far it's been a positive reception. But as I'm sure you know, my country is very divided politically. And I think among some audiences who are open to immigration, open to other cultures, open to travel themselves, this way of thinking would be very interesting, promising, hopeful. But as you might have gathered from what I've said today, I'm not very nice to Donald Trump in the book, for instance. And I think if his followers were to read my book, they would not be very happy with me. So, you know, if I can use the word fuck them, I don't care. That's fine. But I think it may be kind of a divisive way of thinking. But I think in the long term, in the long arc of history, that more international cooperation, decreased border enforcement, more circulation of people and ideas and capital and the rest is inevitable. I think that's the way we are certainly heading. So that needs to be managed in an equitable and humane way. And I don't think we can do that unless we think about the passport and those two kinds of hospitality. In a way, conditional hospitality is unavoidable. The nation state must, in some sense, guard its borders, but I think that the way that we do that can be in line with humanist ideals. I think it could be in line with a certain kind of social justice. I think it can be in line with global cooperation. And I think my country needs to learn that lesson right now. And I hope the rest of the world will come along with us. But I think it's time to start thinking that way.
Patrick, si te parece, no sé si les parece que haga como una pequeña traducción o están bien con la respuesta. Andrés. ¿Hago una pequeña traducción? Ok. Bueno, a ver, retomo entonces.
No, no sé si, pero entendí, puedo entender, puedo entender. Sí, sí.
Perfecto.
Perdón,
Bárbaro.
perdón. Gracias. Gracias, Patrick.
Gracias a ti. ¿Y José? ¿Tiene una pregunta?
Yes, is that okay? Can I do it in English? So, but
Sure,
I'm going
sure.
to do it very slow.
Easier for
So
me. Yeah.
just to make sure that you will understand, because sometimes in Spanish it's a little bit okay. So so thank you so much for the talk. I mean, it was wonderful, and I really like how you the cultural approach to the passport, which is, I think, is something part of your recent book, I guess. So I'm looking forward to reading it, learn more about this.
Oh, good. Thank you.
This broader vision of the passport. So so I agree with what Andres said, that you were saying about this this tension between this specific artifact, right, which is the passport, and this kind of changing identity of the nation state within a global world. And actually, in the example of the Brexit, I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, how they are trying to do this with leaving the European Union, but also trying to get back the design and also the idea of the national passport. But I was also curious about a specific category of passports that emerged in the past century, because not only on how, but it's how people not only embrace national identity through the passport, but also how they did reject nation state. For example, in the case of the Native Americans confederacy in the United States, and also in the case of the Black Panthers, they created these documents called fantasy documents, where they issued their own passports, right? Because they didn't recognize national entity like the US as an entity that they belong, right? So have you found something like that? I mean,
Yeah, in fact, I write at length about that in the book. So let me show you a picture from the book. I'm very interested in the role of passports for the assertion of indigenous sovereignty. And I write about both Aboriginal passports in Australia and the Haudenosaunee passport in the United States, which is from the Six Nation Iroquois Confederacy. So let me see if I can find this image here. Yeah, so that is a Haudenosaunee passport and an Aboriginal passport that came together in Canada when a delegation of Aboriginal Indigenous rights activists traveled there using their Aboriginal passports and had them stamped by the Haudenosaunee, by the native visa stamp of the Indigenous community there. And it was this wonderful ceremony. Of course, when they traveled back to Australia with their Aboriginal passports, they weren't allowed to re-enter the country because they didn't have their official Australian travel documents. In the case of the Haudenosaunee passports, there was a very prominent incident in 2010 when the Iroquois Nation team to play in the, I'm forgetting the name, Iroquois Nation team to play in a tournament in Great Britain wanted to travel on their Iroquois Nation's passport in order to assert their sovereignty and also to assert their qualifications to compete together as a national people, but they were prevented from doing so. And it took Hillary Clinton's intervention and also the UK Prime Minister's intervention to allow them to travel there, but it all came too late, so they were prevented from traveling there to play in the lacrosse tournament. And the additional irony there is that lacrosse, of course, is a Native American sport. And so in the Six Nations people see themselves as the inventors of that sport, but they were prevented from playing in the World Championship because that passport was not recognized in the international community. So, and there's many other stories like that, where indigenous peoples and others like communities have used passports as a way of asserting their sovereignty. And there's a bit of an irony in that, right? Because they're participating then in the same system that recognized nation states participate in. And of course, they're disempowered in that system. So they can assert their sovereignty, but it's not necessarily recognized, as those stories suggest. But there's a kind of a happy ending to this, because 4 years later in 2014, the Six Nations people hosted the World Indoor Lacrosse Tournament on their reservation in New York. And when teams traveled from the United Kingdom and the United States, they got visa stamps from the Anishinaabe people. So that's kind of an ongoing story, but I think it's a very important sort of topic to recognize when thinking about passports in this broader cultural way.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thanks for your question.
A ver, Cristian.
Sí, yo voy a hacer como Andrés. Yo igual entiendo bien inglés y hablo inglés, pero todavía no lo
No hay
manejo
problema, está
tan
bien,
bien para...
gracias.
Encontré bastante interesante, y como un poco lo que decía también José, esta perspectiva más culturalista a este tema de los documentos de identidad. Siempre se agradece, especialmente para nosotros, voy a poner como en primera persona, historiadores que tenemos un lenguaje medio complejo, y el abordaje desde la producción de danza, creo que es muy interesante eso, y es súper rico ese approach. A mí y lo conecto mucho con la presentación que hizo Pablo Negri en la mañana, y también lo que presentó José, y específicamente en el caso de Sara Ahmed, el que hablabas tú,
Sí.
en tu presentación, es como detrás de todo esto existe esta idea como que se puede ir divisando a lo largo del siglo XX, que es como una suerte de cultura de la sospecha, de alguna manera. Porque, como usted decía, si bien existe esta dicotomía entre pasaportes buenos y pasaportes malos, habían ciertas condiciones familiares, de nacionalidad, físicas, que de alguna manera convertían a estos pasaportes buenos en no tan buenos.
Sí.
Y que creo que hay detrás de eso una idea súper clara, que ha sido poco trabajada, yo creo, que es la idea de la sospecha, como dentro de estos organismos de Estado o instituciones de Estado prima esta como sospecha de ciertos individuos, que yo creo que es bastante interesante. Y lo otro es que me gustó mucho también lo que tú propusiste o lo que planteaba Sara, es cuando le preguntan sobre el papá, de dónde era. Porque en el caso chileno, bueno, los prontuarios policiales, yo creo que en la gran mayoría de Latinoamérica y también globalmente, siempre se incluye hijo de, etcétera, etcétera, pero en el caso chileno, por lo menos en los años 30, 40, se incluye un punto que son las relaciones que tiene este delincuente como familiares, de amistad,
Sí.
y se incorporan en estos como prontuarios, que yo creo que también tiene un poco de relación. Y lo último, si bien, como tú planteabas, es la reflexión que hago, claramente la tecnificación o la biometrización de los documentos han hecho un poco más invasivo. Lo que yo me he dado cuenta es que igual el documento en sí, el pasaporte, de alguna forma, es más limpio. No sé si me explico, decir, se incorpora menos información en el documento en sí que lo que ocurría antes. Obviamente esa información se articula o se pone en el computador o una base de datos, pero igual el pasaporte termina siendo un poco menos intervenido, porque si bien yo no trabajo pasaporte, he podido consultar varios archivos del consulado y otras cosas,
Sí.
y he tenido acceso a pasaporte en donde se incluye, por ejemplo, los certificados de antecedentes de la persona que viaja, la huella digital, datos, statements sobre no voy a intervenir en asuntos políticos internos, vacunación, certificados médicos, que siento que, o puedo estar equivocado, en la actualidad puede ser que con el COVID se haya intentado implementar, pero no sé si se ha implementado.
Sí.
Y la última reflexión, que es algo que creo que también es interesante articularlo, es que, por ejemplo, en términos como de células de identidad, en el caso chileno, en el proceso de COVID, en el periodo más álgido de COVID, hubo varias instancias, bueno, nosotros estábamos en un gobierno de derecha de Sebastián Piñera, de muchas organizaciones sociales y de la Universidad de Chile, de impulsar la entrega de células de identidad a inmigrantes irregulares, principalmente por estos como privaciones de movilidad que existían en las ciudades, porque tenías que pedir un pase de movilidad con tu carnet, con tu RUT. Entonces, es muy interesante esas distintas experiencias que yo creo que enriquecen todo lo que hemos conversado hasta el momento. Así que muchas gracias, Patrick.
Muchas gracias. And one quick reflection of mine. Thank you very much. That was wonderful. So the fact that the document, the little book, where's my little book? That these are going away at some point in the future raises some interesting questions for me as a cultural historian. Right, the history of the passport can be told through individuals' documents, right? And for me, what's so interesting is the way that that connects the story of an individual. I mean, the stamps on my passport tell a story about me, where I've been, what I've done, who I've done it with. But at the same time, the emblem on the cover and all of the language inside connect me to a nation state and into the broader geopolitical system. So the passport is a kind of intersection between the individual and these larger governmental or political structures. If all of that goes away, goes into a database that I can't access because it's secured government information, then what does the historian do? Where do we, and I think this is something that probably interests a number of you, and I'm sorry if I missed conversation about this earlier in the day. In some sense, there's going to be more information because more information will be gathered and stored, but the access to that information for people outside of secured government positions will be very limited, I think. So it's going to change the methodologies that we need to use as researchers in order to tell these stories and understand our relationship with freedom of movement and these other issues that I've been discussing.
¿Alguien quiere agregar alguna pregunta? Bueno, nada, me parece digamos, esta última cuestión, ¿no? De los pasaportes como objetos del cotidiano, que me parece que es como, bueno, esto que decía Andrés, ¿no? Este objeto, pero que es un objeto que por un lado intersecta el estado del individuo y por otro lado condensa, ¿no? Toda esta cantidad de, bueno, de legislación, de bases de datos que están por detrás del documento, ¿no? Es un objeto, pero que a su vez tiene este contenido emocional o de identidad y estos usos personales que se hacen de los documentos, que diría que hasta ahora caracterizó al sistema documentario, ¿no? El vínculo del individuo con el documento y su uso, digamos, en interacciones del cotidiano, que por supuesto que me parece muy como muy interesante esta transformación y de alguna manera esta invisibilización, ¿no?
Sí, sí.
De todo este entramado, digamos, bueno, que condensa, digamos, en este papel, del cual, bueno, el papel es como un front, ¿no? Pero que tiene todo este sistema por detrás. Así que, bueno, muy, muy interesante. Si les parece, hacemos un breve break como para refrescarnos y retomamos con la parte de taller que nos queda para la tarde. Nos tomamos, bueno, ya son casi media, tomemos 5 minutos y retomamos.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Muchísimas
Gracias.
gracias.
Yes.